Hello and welcome. So my name is Matt Wickham, and in this session we're going to talk about balancing the QMS or rebalancing the QMS if you've inherited a quality system. It's part one of a three-module set. In the subsequent sessions, these are some of the questions we'll hopefully answer. The essence of them really is, in terms of your QMS, do you understand who your customers are, and really are you delivering to their expectations? And really, are your customers getting what they want out of your quality system? Very often, quality systems are very focused on compliance, but this session and subsequent sessions really sort of explores, are you fulfilling other needs your customers have, and then basically, are you really delivering to all of your customer types in terms of your quality system? So, what do we mean by a balanced QMS? We'll talk about the importance of being customer centric. This obviously begs the question in terms of who are your customers, um, and also what are the ways you can be more customer centric. So, in the subsequent slides, we'll sort of explore these concepts of customers and what they need and what they want, and really whether your QMS is actually delivering to them in terms of their expectations. So what do we mean by a balanced QMS? So really, it all really starts and finishes with customers. And when we talk about customers, very often we think about, especially if we make medical devices or diagnostics or healthcare products, we obviously rightly think of patients. That's in the forefront of our mind. But there are also other types of customers within organizations that we actually deliver for. There's obviously the patients. There's obviously the clinicians who actually buy the products. There's the regulatory agencies in terms of the regulations you have to fulfill. There's the distribution warehouses and distributors. They're forms of customers you actually supply products to. Very often we look at customers within factories and facilities who are upstream of your department as being customers. We look at notifying bodies having this sort of customer relationship with you, and obviously the hospitals that actually use the products you make. So all of these can be considered types of customers, and it's not unusual to actually, when you talk about customers, to have one or more of these groups in your mind. But really, the question is: are they really all customers of your QMS? Some are obviously customers, and some it's a bit more sort of unclear whether they really do fulfil the definition of a customer. So, what is a customer? So, really, the dictionary definition is one where a person who buys goods or services from business. So, in this definition, there's a clear transaction between the person selling the service or goods and the recipient, and there's an exchange of currency, and there's a transaction that happens. So, this actually puts a specific focus on the types of customers and really sort of defines whether they really truly do meet the dictionary definition of a customer. So the attributes of a customer are that the customer is never subordinate to the supplier. So really, they hold all the cards and all the power in the relationship. And essentially, the customer can take their business elsewhere if needed. So they can buy off other suppliers, they can not buy at all, and they can haggle over price. So in terms of power play, the power really resides in the customer as opposed to you as a supplier. Now, over the years, there's this concept of an internal customer within factories. And very often you see departments that are considered to be both customers and suppliers. So, for example, the bottling line is a supplier to the packing line, which is then a supplier to the warehouse. So, over the years, there's this concept that's built up within modern plants in terms of there's this almost internal market within organizations and factories, where you've got these downstream of your unit, there is actually another customer and they supply another customer in turn. And this has led in many ways to the requirement for these internal supplier agreements within factories in terms of defining the relationship between you as a supplier to an internal customer. And And in defining sort of this customer supplier relationship, there have been a number of tools that have been used over the years. This is a traditional SIPOC, which comes from sort of the process excellence, Six Sigma methodology, where it talks about suppliers in terms of who supplies the raw materials, what inputs do you need to to interact with those raw materials via a process, and there's outputs and there's customers. So this methodology is in many ways, in many modern factories, ingrained in sort of the way you look at the whole factory and also dissect it down into individual departments and individual sub processes. Now there are pros and cons of this concept of an internal customer. Um, the advantage of it is everybody everybody likes to be seen as a customer, and that's very fulfilling. Um, and obviously, if you've got your suppliers that really do need to understand your needs, that can only be a good thing. But in terms of disadvantages of the internal customer sort of concept, um, there are quite a few. It can prevent areas working more holistically for the benefit of the whole company. One of the things it does drive is quite siloed thinking in terms of various parts of the company being very focused on their own internal targets to meet their requirements, and not looking at the bigger picture in terms of the factory or the organization in general. Um, it can encourage defects to be passed downstream, because obviously if you can pass those downstream to and remove it from your area, it doesn't impact your area. So it does sort of drive some very peculiar behaviors in terms of how defective product and defects are actually handled. It can drive sometimes inappropriate relationships between areas in terms of working together. And one big thing for me, it dilutes from the overall understanding of who is the overall end customer. So over the years, this internal customer concept has actually flourished, but in many ways, as we'll come on to, my view is that there isn't really the real customer that really matters is actually the external customer to your organization. And this isn't a new concept. And Peter Drucker, one of the founders of modern quality management, was strongly of the view that the only customers that really mattered were actually those external to your company that actually paid the bills. So that you can see internal customers within organizations, but actually they didn't really meet the real sort of the real requirement in actually they actually paid the bills, and actually they control the whole show, and the ones that mattered were the external customers to your organization. So even though we had in the previous slide, we had a whole range of players that could be considered customers, very few of those really do meet the requirement and the definition of a true customer. So if you just look at the QMS and rather than the organization as a whole, who are the customers of the QMS? But obviously, the QMS, it exists to ensure that customers receive product that's safe, reliable, and meets all expectations. That's a very common definition of the quality system. But it doesn't talk about the regulators so much, and it doesn't talk about the shareholders in terms of whether your organization makes money. So really, in terms of customers of the QMS, um, you can boil them down to three main groups. Um, Obviously, at the bottom of the slide, there's customer experience. That's the end user of your product. It's the patients. It's the hospitals that actually use the medical devices and diagnostics you manufacture. So that's obviously a very obvious and big area in terms of the QMS. The top right, we talk about regulatory compliance. There is an expectation that your QMS meets either standards or federal regulations in terms of compliance. So there is a customer group that looks at your QMS in a very specific way. But one group that's very often forgotten is in these slides we call business health. And these are really the shareholders. It's basically, is your company making money? Is it growing? And as we'll come on to, the QMS has huge impact in terms of the ability of your organization to make money. So when you distill it down, really there are three main customer groups that your QMS has to satisfy. And a theme running through this training module and through the whole sort of session is actually, are you meeting the requirements and expectations of all of these three customer groups? Now, to go back to these groups, regulatory compliance, they are really concerned, are you meeting all the regulations and expected standards? Um, the customer experience group are really your end customers who buy your products. They obviously need to be satisfied in terms of their expectations. And finally, the sort of financial group in terms of, is your business financially viable? And they have very, very different perspectives and sometimes overlapping perspectives in terms of their expectations of your quality system. Now, if we dissect these groups a little more closely in terms of regulatory compliance, they are really concerned with, is your QMS demonstrating with objective evidence, documentation generally, that you're meeting the requirement of the appropriate standard or regulation. So they are looking for, and they want to see, how you manage change. Is it managed in a controlled way? How you manage and control test equipment? How you manage and control your documentation? How you control the design of your products in terms of your customer requirements and how they feed through the design control process, and obviously into manufacturing. And are you making decisions based on data and objective evidence? So they look at the regulations in a very prescriptive way, and they want to see evidence within your QMS that you're actually meeting these requirements in terms of the expectations of either the regulation or the appropriate standard that you have to follow. Now, the end customer is primarily concerned with three things. Are they getting product that's actually of the quality they expect, and is it safe? Can they get it? Is it available? And is it the price that they're willing to pay? Now, the previous slide looks at compliance against the standards. Now, the customers really, so they don't care, but for them, compliance is an expected attribute. And in many ways, a business that's compliant can actually fail if it's not satisfying the expectations of the customer in terms of quality and safety and availability and price. So then you can meet the regulatory requirements for the QMS, but actually fail miserably in terms of customer experience and giving your customers products which are either poor quality or unsafe or simply not available, or so overly priced that they're unwilling to actually pay the price for them. Now, the third group, business health, are really concerned with, is your business financially viable? Is it making a bottom line profit? Is it selling? Is it selling products? Is it increasing market share? Is the share price going up? And in the same way, you can have conflicts between the two customer groups in terms of their expectations. This customer group is really concerned with, is your business making money? Again, a business that is compliant and satisfying the customer can still fail because it's unprofitable and it's not selling products that are actually growing the business. They may be very compliant products. They may be even products that actually the customer likes. But if it's not making money and sustaining the business in the long term, then actually that's a big deal for the long term viability of the organisation or business. Now, if we go back to the true definition of a customer, and look at these customer groups through the eyes of that definition, they do meet the true definition of a customer in that they can take their business elsewhere. So if you look at the regulatory compliance group, the regulators and notifying bodies, they can actually refuse to approve your QMS. They can approve to sign it off. And you will obviously be unable to export to certain areas and actually sell your products. So they have an enormous power in terms of their ability to impact your QMS, but they can actually make a decision that your QMS is simply not good enough. Obviously, the customer experience groups, customers can decide to purchase from other suppliers. Unless you have a monopoly, they can go somewhere else in terms of buying either your product or service from another supplier. And likewise, the business health shareholders who invest in your business can decide to withdraw their money and put that money into other businesses. So they can actually say no in terms of where they fund their investments. So these three customer groups really are true customers in terms of the definition of a customer, in that they hold the true power. They can shop elsewhere for their needs if they want. So really, the essence of this module and subsequent modules is that there's a conversation that your quality system has to be balanced. It has to it has to actually meet all of these requirements. And over the last few years, there's been a really big focus on regulated compliance, especially in Europe, in terms of either the MDR and the IVDR regulations. And eventually these will settle down, and then they'll flush out. It may take a number of years for that to happen. Uh, but the focus on compliance will actually settle back down to it's basically an attribute that the customer expects as a given. Being compliant will not differentiate you in the marketplace. It is an expectation customers have that they buy goods that are actually compliant. You don't buy a car because it meets all the safety requirements for electrical safety. You buy it because it's actually giving you something that, in terms of your needs. You don't buy products generally because they're compliant. It doesn't differentiate them in the marketplace. And this really, in the conversation we'll have in subsequent sessions, is really going to force organisations to really sort of move, say, not away from compliance, but actually are there other attributes they need to be focusing on at the same time as regulated compliance. And really sort of it will actually force an internal conversation, I believe, within quality organisations. What is their true purpose? Is it being compliant, ensuring compliance? So the analogy here is it actually handing out speeding tickets and being the police, or is it actually helping design more beautiful cars in terms of their sort of their contribution to quality? And my view strongly is, it has to at times hand out speeding tickets and ensure compliance, but its primary purpose is actually making sure that products are being designed that the customers want. And really, again, compliance is a given. It's not something that's going to differentiate your company from others in the marketplace. So we talk about customers and the three customer groups in terms of their expectations, and this really sort of leads on to the question, in terms of defining what their expectations are. What do they consider to be important, and it leads on to the concept of value. And really, value is really in the eye of the beholder, in terms of one person's valuable is another person's not valuable, and in terms of manufacturing methodologies, value has, especially lean, it has a very specific meaning related to how the product is changed during its manufacturing process, and whether the customer will be willing to pay for that change. And it involves concepts that you may have heard of, such as value-added activities and non-value-added activities, and mapping the value stream. Now, different customers will consider different aspects of the QMS more important than others, depending on their perspective. And as we talked of previously, in terms of the three customer groups, they very often have very different perspectives of your QMS, depending on their perspective. Now, the concept of value really sort of arose from sort of lean thinking, which actually originated in Toyota and really has transformed the efficiency of modern manufacturing plants. And one of the strands that will flow through subsequent sessions is really looking at the QMS with lean eyes, in terms of looking at the transactional process within the QMS, in terms of removing waste and allowing it to flow. And key to that is looking at the QMS through different eyes, in terms of understanding what customers decide feel is important to them, and what is valuable. So some of the concepts within lean thinking, though it's usually applied to manufacturing processes, if you overlay them onto the transactional process within QMS and look at the QMS through those sort of lean eyes, that it's a very, very powerful methodology to actually remove waste and recenter and rebalance the QMS to ensure that it's actually meeting the customer requirements. So a lot of the methodology I'll talk about is some of the lean thinking that has been applied to manufacturing businesses over the last 30 years, and it's less so to the QMS, and we'll explore that in subsequent slides. Now, really, in terms of what customers define as valuable, at the end of the day, they're really more concerned with outcomes than anything. And ideally, the outcomes they're looking for is it related to what they feel is valuable. And basically, we will come on to that in terms of will force organizations, and it'll force you to look at the QMS with different eyes, and it will force you to derive KPIs which are actually closely linked to your customer expectations and delivery of your QMS to meet those expectations, and also KPIs that are actually in harmony in terms of meeting those three customer types. So if you explore the concept of output of the QMS, because that's the only thing that the customer really wants or is concerned about in terms of how your QMS behaves. In terms of regulatory compliance, the top of the slide are some of the things that we often present to regulatory bodies to show that our QMS is actually meeting the regulatory requirements. So the average time to close a complaint, the number of staff with approved training plans, the number of CAPAs open at any one time, the number of service orders open at any one time. But really, from a customer's perspective, and putting on the customer hat, does the customer really care about these? At the bottom of the slide are the KPIs which are more focused with the output of the quality system and related to things that the customer really feels important. Are their complaints closed to their satisfaction? How many deviations in the factory are related to individuals being poorly trained? How many CAPAs are implemented that don't actually prevent the original issue from recurring again? The percentage of customers with equipment that cannot be used due to their equipment breaking. So really, one of the strands within the lean methodology is putting a very customer focused perspective on either the manufacturing process or in this concept the QMS, to really ask the question: is your QMS really meeting the requirements and the needs of that customer type in terms of what they expect? And very often the things that we measure within the QMS are, and we'll come on to, are transactional activities. It's the mechanics of the QMS turning. And in many ways, customers don't care about this. They're more concerned about the output of the QMS and is it meeting their requirements. Conversely, the customers, the end patients and the hospitals, they're really concerned. Are they getting the product on time with the right quality? Are the instructions clear? Is it meeting their requirements in terms of product quality and reliability? Are you responding to their questions in a timely manner? And basically, if they have a complaint, is it resolved adequately, quickly, to the satisfaction of the customer? So they're not concerned with the number of events you've got open in terms of the number of CAPAs or the number of complaints. They're really concerned in just their specific complaint. Again, they've got a very, customer-centric perspective on your QMS. They're really concerned about, is your QMS giving what they need in terms of expectations. In terms of business health, in terms of the finances, they're very more concerned with, is your company making a profit? So any KPI that's directly linked to the profitability of your business are the things that they're really concerned about. Is your scrap level too high? Do you have too much inventory? Are you spending too much money and praising in incoming materials in terms of their quality and inspecting them? What's the cost of your raw materials? Again, it's looking at the quality system with a very specific perspective in terms of the finances. So there's not a discussion here. Is it compliant? Is it meeting the end customer requirements? It's a very sort of financially focused view of the QMS, which is it's very important to say is equally valid as the regulatory compliance areas and the customer health perspectives. So in essence, in order to rebalance or balance a QMS, what you need to do is to actually look at the quality system elements across the whole of the quality system with multiple perspectives. You have to sort of metaphorically put on three different hats simultaneously and look at the same system in three different ways and really ask the question: is your QMS delivering for each of those customer groups? And perspective is very important. We don't see things as they are; we see things as we are. So it really does force you to actually take a step back and actually, in many ways, pretend you're the customer in terms of those three customer groups, in terms of deriving either better metrics, but also really fundamentally questioning, is your QMS actually functioning and firing on all cylinders to meet all of those three requirements? So if you go back to a more specific example and take one very specific example around an aspect of the quality system around the control of non-conforming products. So many regulatory standards have this. The FDA has an expectation that you control product that's either defective or non-conforming. Now, the regulators will look at your quality system for this very specific quality system element, and they will only be concerned with, are you meeting the regs and standards? Are you demonstrating control? Are you segregating? Are you labeling adequately defective product, non-conforming product? Are you demonstrating against the expectations of the regulations or the standards? You're controlling non-conforming material. Now the customers primarily are only concerned, are they getting the product they want? So basically their main question when they look at this part of the quality system is defective product preventing them getting the product of the quality they want in the time they want? So they have a very selfish view of the quality system. They're less concerned about how well you're bonding it and labeling it and meeting the regulations. They're really concerned with, are they getting the product they paid for in a timely manner, and does it meet the quality requirements? Now, the third group will look at the same part of the quality system with a different set of eyes. So business health will be more concerned with the amount of scrap, and importantly, if products are going to be scrapped in terms of, is it going to be dispositioned to scrap or released, they're more concerned is that going to happen in a timely manner? So obviously there's a concern of, if it's going to be scrapped, there's going to be cost implications. But if it is going to be scrapped, very often operations and the business side of the house are more concerned with, make this decision quickly so we can actually plan for either purchasing more raw materials in to actually replace defective product, and they're really concerned with, is the control in non-conforming product aspect of the QMS. Then they're more concerned if, are you wasting company money in terms of how that part of the QMS sort of operates on a day-to-day basis. So really, this session really sets the scene for the next module, where we talk about, customer centricity, and in terms of how do you balance a QMS to ensure that your quality system is delivering. What are the tools that you will actually need and will help to actually make that happen? Conceptually, it's very simple to look at the three customer groups, but in the next few slides we'll dive into sort of more specific practical ways that, what does this mean in terms of a quality system? How do you make it more balanced? And as I talked previously, in terms of, there's a lot of lean methodology that's been applied to quality systems within factories very, very successfully. And I'll talk about overlaying that and using that sort of methodology on the transactional process of the QMS. And the really big focus in the subsequent slides and material is really sort of understanding what your customers feel is valuable and really working relentlessly to deliver it. Because at the end of the day, it's not you that decides what's important to the customer. It's actually the customer that makes that final decision. So essentially, basically, the subsequent material will talk about what are the practical ways that you make sure you realign or rebalance your quality system, that it meets the customer expectations, not just of the regulatory compliance perspective, but also of the two other customer groups. So shortly we'll cover that in the next module. So join me for that.